Hello, hello, everyone. I'm sure there were some people on Facebook that were watching me pop up, and I'm just like smiling at the screen, and they're like, is she going to talk? I was just letting, as most of you know at this point, I stream on my Facebook page, my Facebook group, and YouTube. And so I hit go live on all three of them, and they sync up at different times. Anyway, so it's just waiting for to be live on all of them. So, hi, it's so nice to be here. Kimsey Berkwin here. I'll just start with the introduction. I'm an integrative nutritionist in my online nutrition and wellness practice called Progressive Health and Wellness, where I work with ambitious men and women who are struggling with their mental or physical health by taking a root caused body mind approach to optimize their overall wellness. So, my talk for you today is what if hormone imbalance is a symptom and is not actually a root cause? Let that sink in for a minute. So, if you're listening and you've been diagnosed with hypothyroidism or perhaps have PMS symptoms or significant perimenopausal symptoms, menopausal symptoms, perhaps blood sugar dysregulation, been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, low testosterone, high estrogen, right? The multitude of different ways that our hormones can become imbalanced. What if I told you that 90% of the time that is a symptom of something deeper? Let me explain why today. So, what I'll get into today is I'm going to talk about basically, this talk is for you if you've struggled with these symptoms, right? Like I said, if you've been diagnosed with hypothyroidism and you have the fatigue and you can't lose weight and the depression and thinning hair and nails, or if you have PMS that is really affecting your life or like really painful or heavy menstrual cycles, or low testosterone, so low libido, men, if you have low motivation and drive, or perhaps high estrogen that's contributing to that too, high cortisol, high stress, anxiety, insomnia. And you've been trying to deal with all of these things, doing what makes sense on the surface, right? Take thyroid medication, do the deep breathing, do the stress management things, but it's not working. What if I said that's because it might be coming from the gut? And we actually need to step back, go deeper, a layer deeper, and look at the gut because that can so significantly influence our hormone balance. So, in my practice, for a reason, even if people come in, like I've had women come in with PCOS, for example, and that's what's bringing them in, we'll obviously do work on diet and things like that, obviously, because that influences gut health too. But I rarely start with hormones, rarely start with hormones. And that goes for testing, that goes for supplements, that goes for like what we're targeting is rarely hormones that I start with. I won't start. I describe our process as very progressive. So we start with nutrition and lifestyle. So, getting in some kind of movement, anti inflammatory diet, stress management techniques, if that's just like implementing a breath work or diaphragmatic breathing, whatever it might be. Then we move into a gut focus protocol. So, we'll run a stool test, see what's going on in the person's gut health, really work to optimize the health of the digestive tract. Then we look at hormones. And the reason being, and that goes for any of the hormones. So that goes for, thyroid, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, right? Cortisol. The reason being is because those two first phases so significantly influence our hormones that even if we were to test right off the bat and look at, let's just say, sex hormones right away, even if they're in balance, we're not going to do anything about that without getting these other two phases in place first. So, in a nutshell, that's what I mean when I say hormone imbalance is often a symptom, not a true root cause. Hormones are so responsive to our internal and external environment. And a big factor of our internal environment is gut health. So, let me explain the different ways that when I say gut health, I'm talking specifically about the microbiome in this case. So I'll explain what the microbiome is. I'll share some research highlights about how it affects different hormones. And then we'll talk about some steps that you can take to improve your gut health and therefore improve your hormones. So, the gut microbiome refers to the trillions of microbes. So, bacteria, fungi, yeast, parasites, viruses that inhabit the large intestines, mostly inhabit the large intestines. These microbes influence our health to such a degree, from nutrient assimilation and absorption, priming and training our gut immune system and overall immune system. Again, hormone balance, metabolic health, inflammation, digestion and absorption, that researchers now often refer to the microbiome as another organ system. When it comes to hormone balance, they can influence these different hormones in a number of ways. So, first, let's take thyroid, for example. So, hypothyroidism, a couple weeks ago, I gave a talk on how, you know what, actually, I'm so sorry to interrupt like that. I just had another thought. I want to include something briefly before about gut health before I talk about the hormone piece. Um, Most of the time, what would give me an indication or an inkling that someone's gut health might be affecting their hormones, they have GI symptoms, right? So they might have acid reflux, bloating, foul smelling gas, diarrhea, constipation, alternation of both, but not always, not always. Some of the worst stool tests I've seen were in people that didn't have GI symptoms. They were having 1, 2, 3, like full formed easy bowel movements per day, no reflux, no bloating. Like they really didn't have GI symptoms, but there were like parasites that were coming up. They had yeast overgrowth, they had H. pylori. It was just those symptoms were manifesting in other ways outside of the GI tract. So I really want to include that up front. So the people that are scrolling that are like, nope, I don't have GI symptoms, like it could still be you. I think that's a really important piece. So going back to looking at how these gut microbes influence our different hormone systems. So starting with thyroid, I gave a talk 2, 3 weeks ago about the different types of hypothyroidism, if you will, and how there's primary hypothyroidism, which is how, is the thyroid inadequately producing its main hormones, T4 and T3. But another one is euthyroid. And euthyroid, a big way that shows up is from under conversion of T4 into T3. So T4 being the inactive form of the hormone, most of which the thyroid produces, and T3 being the active form of the hormone. So T4 has to be converted into T3 in order for the thyroid hormone to do its job, basically, and the rest of the body. And the microbiome actually directly, like certain bacteria within the microbiome, directly converts that T4 to T3 conversion. It influences deiodinase activity, which is the enzyme that does that conversion. So that's huge. We also know that the gut microbiome directly connects to, so imbalances in the gut microbiome directly influences the onset of autoimmunity and therefore Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. We also know that the gut microbiome, if there's inflammation in the gut and either an overgrowth or what we refer to as dysbiosis, so an imbalance in beneficial versus opportunistic bacteria, if there's infections, that is a stress to the body. And that stress to the body signals the release of cortisol. So we've seen how not only cortisol can, like the stress response can be initiated from the gut, but then it kind of becomes a vicious cycle where cortisol can, like chronic stress, can also create imbalances in the microbiome. But that's another way, if there's elevated cortisol chronically or imbalanced cortisol chronically, that can also affect how the pituitary communicates with the thyroid, as well as that conversion of T4 into T3. And again, none of that would be effectively fixed if there is gut inflammation or dysbiosis. We can also appreciate looking at how the gut affects Estrogen levels. This is another really big one. So if you're listening and you have, especially if you have gallbladder symptoms, so if you've had your gallbladder removed, if you have bile stagnation, if you have gallstones, if you have constipation, if you have diarrhea, if you don't tolerate fatty foods very well, there could be a gallbladder connection, even if you've never been told that. If you have like a pain or a pressure in the upper right quadrant of your abdomen, if you notice a dizziness, if fatty foods upset your stomach, those can other be like red palms or itchiness all over. Those can also be signs of gallbladder issues. But what I'm going to get at is estrogen. So how poor bile flow, but also how the estrobolome, so this whole classification of microbes in the microbiome that affects our estrogen metabolism and bile acid metabolism. So how those things influence our estrogen levels. And basically, estrogen is detoxed through the liver into the gallbladder and into the bowels, where it should normally be eliminated. But through activities in the estrobolome can basically free that estrogen that would normally be bound and not able to be reabsorbed. The microbiome can free that estrogen. It can also deconjugate bile salts, both of which allow that estrogen to be reabsorbed, which is one of the key pathways for estrogen dominance. So if you're listening to this, men and women, and you know you have estrogen dominance, or if you identify with the symptoms like heavy, clotty periods, bloating around the menstrual cycle, so like water retention bloating, breast swelling and tenderness. Men, if you have low testosterone and if you've been tested for low estrogen, or if you've actually formed gynecomastia or male breasts, those are all signs of high estrogen. I would absolutely look in the gut. That is a huge source of where the estrogen could be coming from. And then the third is going back to that stress response piece. If the stress response, if there's dysbiosis or inflammation coming from the digestive tract, we talked about how that can elicit the release of cortisol, the stressor, and chronically dysregulated cortisol levels is one of the, and inflammation are two of the biggest drivers for low progesterone in women. So women, if you're trying to get pregnant, if you're trying to stay pregnant, if you are experiencing painful cramping around your menstrual cycle, if you're transitioning into perimenopause or menopause and noticing a lot of that anxiety, insomnia, those can all be signs of low progesterone. Very common to see. And again, a place that we start with looking at that is the gut. As I've said before in previous talks, inflammation and stress are two of the, and those things aren't usually separated. They're usually mutual. Those are two of the biggest drivers of low progesterone, because progesterone is so important for fertility. But if the body is stressed out and inflamed, it's probably not a great time to get pregnant. And so it will down regulate progesterone production almost as a hedge against that, to prevent it. So working in the gut is a huge place to start. If you're again noticing some of those symptoms or trying to get pregnant or transitioning into perimenopause or some of the PMS symptoms. And then blood sugar balance. This one's very interesting because blood sugar balance, while we can achieve, there's a lot of things that influence that. And we can achieve improvements in blood sugar balance through diet, through exercise, obviously. Hormone balance, that's something that's a lot of science is emerging on lately about how estrogen is very insulin sensitivity promoting. I said that in such a weird way. Estrogen helps with insulin sensitivity. And so women transitioning into menopause, they change nothing with their diet and lifestyle, but suddenly have all these metabolic markers light up on their lab tests. So there's several different things that influence metabolism. But because of how the microbiome influences inflammation and stress, but also because of short chain fatty acid production from the microbiome. So, for example, butyrate. Butyrate is a key short chain fatty acid produced by Bifidobacterium species. And butyrate also enhances our insulin signaling. There can be, how I describe it to clients is when it comes to metabolic health, I would say 80% of it is diet and lifestyle, but there is that 20% that's independent of that. And that's where we look at things like gut health and hormone balance and mitochondrial health. So again, if you're kind of spinning your wheels and you've changed your diet and you're doing the exercise and you're doing all the stuff, but your blood sugar markers aren't changing, then that would be another thing to consider looking at is what does the microbiome health look like? And really, my encouragement for people listening to this is to give you hope. So again, if you've tried all of the things and even if you haven't, even if you haven't tried all the things, if you're just tired of dealing with PMS or this transition into menopause or andropause is becoming really frustrating and difficult, or you've been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition like Hashimoto's or Graves', it may go deeper. And I say that in a good way. Like if you have digestive symptoms, especially how that might really be contributing to these hormone imbalances. And by improving the digestive health, your hormone imbalance could greatly improve on its own. If you could come off of thyroid medication, for example, or feel less stressed and anxious in life without having to change anything about your life, it could be really positive. So now talking about what can you do to support your hormone balance through the gut. Where I would start first, as always, is diet. So an anti-inflammatory whole foods diet. So basically, if you're eating a lot more like fast foods or highly processed foods, that starting to shift that towards choosing more whole foods and minimally processed foods. So emphasizing vegetables, fruits, obviously, wild caught grass fed animal products, healthy fats like nuts and seeds and avocados and coconut, minimizing grains, but they don't necessarily have to be avoided completely. And then choosing products where if you look at the ingredients list on the product, you know what all of them are. Like you would probably have them in your pantry. That starting there is huge. There's also some research shows benefits to intermittent fasting. This really depends on the person, but some research shows benefits to intermittent fasting on its ability to increase, I believe it was Akkermansia specifically. So Akkermansia is a bacteria that's particularly beneficial, particularly therapeutic, because it helps maintain the integrity of the gut lining, the mucosal lining. So very powerful anti-inflammatory benefits. And fasting can also have other benefits too on like the migrating motor complex in the digestive tract, which is this healing and repair mechanism. It helps with tissue regeneration. So allowing the tissue to basically have a chance to regenerate.